Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thanks for being here, Stephen.
Great to be here.
So why don't we get right into it? The Arbitrum Airdrop. It was one of the most highly anticipated events of the year so far in crypto. Once we heard about the announcement, Twitter sort of went into into a frenzy. The day came and there was a lot of chaos. There were some outages. There were some scammers. So we want to talk about all of it. So let's back up just a little bit. Why launch a token and why do it now? I know that Arbitrum has been around for a while, so it's taken some time to get to this place. So what's with the timing? Why not launch something earlier like the Optimism folks did?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the point that I come at this from is really the technical point, and that's really the point where Off-Chain Labs comes from. And from a technical perspective, a token is really a symptom. The thing that we actually wanted to launch was decentralization, decentralized governance, where there's a DAO and there's no centralized entity that controls the network. So, some people ask this question like, oh, why now? It's not like the token is just the tool that you need to get the decentralization. And that's also why now, because in order for it to make sense, you have to have the other parts of the protocol decentralized as well. So if you look at the Arbitrum history, in August of 21, the chain was launched. In August of 22, the Nitro upgrade happened, which gave the chain massive additional capacity to meet the demand. A few months later in November, validation of the chain was opened up, and many institutional partners, such as the Ethereum Foundation, Google Cloud, and others joined on to validate the chain. And now the seed was set, so those parts are largely distributed and decentralized. And now the question is, what about the rest of the controls of the chain, the upgradability, the future of the chain? Now is the time. So it was really a technical roadmap that got into this. Others may make a decision to do it earlier, but from our perspective, at least from my perspective, until all the technical pieces are in place to really fully give up control, which were in the case of Arbitrum, it didn't make sense to launch a token because, again, the token was never the point. The decentralization and governance was the point.
So we're going to get into governance in a little bit, but I do want to start from the beginning a little bit. How did you guys come up with the eligibility criteria for who would get such a token?
So the eligibility criteria was a partnership. Off-Chain Lab was a launch partner together with Nansen, the blockchain analytics firm, as well as the Arbitrum Foundation, of course, were the launch partners there. And they were really looking and trying to discern usage of the network and real usage of the network and trying to, again, it's all about the governance, give the governance power, give the voice to those who use the network, have demonstrated extended usage of the network, and actually care about, or likely and hopefully care about the values in the future, on the future of the network. And that was the overarching, we can get into more details if you want, but that was the overarching theme, which is let's, as these three launch partners work together to really get the governance in the hands of the real users of Arbitrum.
So in the hours leading up to the big airdrop, the Arbitrum Block Explorer experienced some network outages. The website to claim tokens also experienced some outages. People were very hype about it, and so the server demand just reached its capacity. Those who were able to claim their tokens had to pay insanely high gas fees because of network activity. And there was a lot of scams going on. There were reports of a lot of scams going on that they were infiltrating some Telegram groups, some Discord chats, posting spoof links that would bring these users to fake websites. So in hindsight, what do you think should have been done differently leading up to that moment?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I guess the silver lining here is, it was, all those things you mentioned, those are the Web 2 tech. The Web 2 tech surrounding the Arbitrum airdrop didn't do that well. The Web 3 tech actually held up pretty well. And the rising fees, networks, every single network out there has a capacity, and as basically the rising fees are a way of metering that capacity, and there was an insane amount of inbound requests and interest in transacting on the chain. But the chain actually, the core technology held up quite well. Obviously, and this was the foundation, so I can't speak for them, but I think anyone could say that if they had to do it again, they'd probably make sure that there was more capacity on the website and the Web 2, and also the Arbiscan Block Explorer also obviously needed more capacity, but it was a sign of the Web 2 components around this were not holding up as well as they could have, and definitely hindsight is 2020 there. In terms of scams, so the Arbitrum Foundation took, I think, as many steps as it could and put out lots of communication to really say, hey, only interact with official links, official channels. And whenever there's a big moment, it's a sign of, it's inevitable that scammers will be out there. And, I think that they tried to do a really good job to prevent that as much as possible. But, there can always be a Telegram group where someone, tricks people, unfortunately. And I think, we as a community, because this may have been, the biggest airdrop this year, it won't be the last airdrop. There'll be many more. And I think we as a community really need to work on just making some of these security practice and educational practice ingrained in people. We'll never get down to zero, unfortunately, but we have to drive the scammers out together. I know the foundation did their best and tried, but it's absolutely a work in progress as a community.
So as you just said, that you're part of Off-Chain Labs, which has helped sort of steer the Arbitrum blockchain and created the Arbitrum Foundation as well as the DAO. So I understand that there's these two entities that help bring the Arbitrum ecosystem move forward. How do they differ in their roles, and who runs the Arbitrum Foundation? Yeah,
so Off-Chain Labs, the foundation has a set of excellent people there, and Off-Chain Labs gave them a lot of technical guidance as they were setting up, in particular, in servicing their goal, which really was how do you set this up in a way that gives token holders the maximum capacity. So I'll answer your question, but the real answer is who controls the Arbitrum Foundation. It's really actually the DAO and the token holders. So if you look at the bylaws and the foundational documents of the foundation, that sounds funny, but I think that's the right word, you'll see that the DAO can vote to remove directors, can vote to elect directors, can increase the number of directors, can remove some directors, because the foundation is really servicing the DAO. It's not there to make a profit. It's servicing the DAO, and because the DAO has a lot of resources, but it doesn't have hands and legs and feet, and it can't go ahead and run infrastructure. It can't go ahead and many of these partnership deals, for example, with Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, they want to have a human flesh counterparty. They don't want to do everything in the open. They often require NDAs and privacy. So the DAO is there, the foundation is there to service the DAO. But ultimately, it's the DAO's decision of well, who do we as the community want to represent us in the foundation? That's why it's so critical that the DAO can replace the foundation directors if and when and whenever. It's not even a term thing, whenever they want. Today, the foundation it's a Cayman Island foundation, and it's run by 3 directors who have been named in the foundational docs. 2 of them are based in the Cayman Islands, and they have obviously responsibilities, fiduciary responsibilities to the foundation. And if you look at the most important thing to get more info on what they're doing, you look at the mission statement of the foundation, which is public, and it's really all about servicing the Arbitrum DAO and building the ecosystem and the technology. And again, because the DAO obviously gets to decide who it is and what capacity, but I think it's pretty non-controversial that a DAO needs humans to run infrastructure and to represented in situations in which a DAO is not always, a public forum is not always appropriate.
So in the proposal to create the DAO, there was something that I read that 44% of ARB tokens are reserved for off-chain employees and for investors. How did you land on that number? And are you concerned that it might lead to some claims of centralization?
Yeah, it's a great question. So principle number 1 was this always has to be majority in the hands of the community. So the counter side of that, of course, is 56% were given to the community in different capacities, the airdrop, the foundation, the DAO, et cetera. Of course, there's a question, and in the long run, that's very good. There is a question, though, which you're getting at, which is very important. What can investors do? And so one thing to say, in terms of transferring their tokens, all Off-Chain Labs team members, as well as investors, all their tokens have gradual over 4-year transfer restrictions with nothing unlocking before 1 year. So no one sold their tokens in the company, no investors have sold, nor can they, and they'll have that gradually over 4 years. But when it comes to governance, which I think what you're probably getting at, and the voice, can investors go ahead and insert their voice in certain ways? And I think there are a few things to mention there. Number 1 is, and you may get to it, what happened in AIP1, so I don't want to jump ahead, but no investors or Off-Chain Labs employees voted in that. This was the community deciding. And in fact, Off-Chain Labs as a policy does not allow its employees to go ahead and vote with their tokens. it does have a process in which they can delegate and a rubric in which they can make sure that they are being very thoughtful about delegation and making sure that it's independent. They're not allowed to delegate to someone that you control or have influence over. And similarly, investors, and the idea here is really to empower community members. Investors also, I've spoken with many of them, intend to delegate their tokens. And ideally, by doing so, empower community members, university programs of blockchain. This will all be very public, which people can see. What I can say is, to date, no investors or off-chain labs people have voted. Off-chain labs employees will never vote directly as long as they're off-chain labs employees, based on the policy that we have in place today. And I think over time, because the other thing is, despite the 44 and the 56 aren't even the important numbers, right? Even of the 44, many of them sit in the Dow Treasury. The airdrop is only roughly 12.7 or 5.5%, and therefore I think it's the role of the investors and it's the role of the delegation to make sure that they are bolstering the community and not voting themselves. I think those policies are in place, particularly for off-chain, to make sure that off-chains is really just supporting the community and its values are not, its interests are not going to, be represented really directly at all.
So one of the first proposals put forth by the DAO was that the Arbitrum Foundation would receive 750 million tokens. And I'd like your opinion on this. I know that you say that you're with Off-Chain Labs, but I would like for you anyway to say what you thought of this. But before the voting period ended, tokens had started to move over already into the wallet for the foundation. Why would the foundation move over those tokens before the vote period ended?
So I can't speak for the foundation, but I can speak as a launch partner that, was very involved, together with the foundation and Nansen in figuring out the distribution of the airdrop and some of these buckets. I can speak to that as to what the overall intention here was. And what I'll say is, if you look at any other layer 2 blockchain today, even ones that have governance, they are 100% controlled by, generally, all of the community tokens are controlled by the foundation. The very notion that any tokens are controlled by on-chain, doesn't exist in any DAO but Arbitrum. In Arbitrum, even today, 35.27, I believe, % of the tokens are controlled by the DAO. And the DAO can, and also, by the way, all the ETH coming in, all the fees from the chain, the net fees, go to the DAO directly, not the foundation, not off-chain labs. And the upgradability of the chain is also controlled by the foundation, so by the DAO, not the foundation. The DAO is very, very empowered, but to this point, it does make sense for the DAO to have hands and feet and a representative. And there was an unfortunate miscommunication, and it was, definitely a miscommunication. Looking back in hindsight, it's obvious, but it wasn't obvious at the time, or else it wouldn't have been miscommunicated. And the idea was, this 42% is really for the DAO. 750 are going to the foundation to represent the DAO, and not its own interest of the DAO. And the rest are going to sit in the DAO treasury. But that wasn't, and that vote was I hate to use the word, but if you read it, it was, if you read the AIP1, it said this is a ratification. It was never intended, and that went live, that AIP1 went live on March 16th, a week before the airdrop. So all this information was out there, but it was, the pie chart, it wasn't clear from there, and people probably, got the wrong message from looking at the pie chart page. So there was definitely an unfortunate miscommunication, but I think the important thing that I'd focus on is the DAO is the most decentralized DAO that exists. Everyone else just sort of gives everything to the foundation. I think people were just confused more, which is like, hey, was it not? The intention was that it was, in the initial distribution given to the foundation, but I think there was a lot of clarity. And then the follow-up was there was a lot more clarity given to this. So now there are transparency reports required of the foundation. There's vesting of these tokens. And I, as a community member, actually think that the place where this ended is is even better, and the community seems happy. And I also think, transparency, accountability, budget accountability is a great thing. And I think, the community ended up in an even stronger place from that incident.
Right. Well, what happened afterwards is that the foundation gave into some concessions, right? 700 million tokens are being locked up into the smart contract, and it'll be unlocked over a course of 4 years, I believe it is.
Yes, I believe so.
But so in hindsight, because you can say it's a miscommunication, but a voting period is a voting period, right? There is an end date. So what should have been done differently?
Yeah. So again, I think the voting was proposed as a ratification, and that I think the point is there's no need for this vote to happen. Like, and I think people had a very legitimate point, which is like, yeah, if the vote is not being voting, like, why are they voting? And I think that's was part of the feedback that was taken and changed. So I think that was probably good. Again, I can't speak for the changes that the foundation made, but I do think they did an excellent job. But again, their intention was, and if they read through it, their intention was this was basically, there were many decisions that had to be made ahead of time. For example, there were also the technical decisions of who's on the initial security council, what are the voting thresholds, right? There was this, to decentralize had to have all these pieces in place, and this is one of those pieces that was sort of put in place, and all of those things were up for in this vote, even though they weren't undoable, right? You couldn't go ahead and change the voting threshold. It's just circular, right? Obviously, so they were all put up for this vote. In hindsight, I think people had a very good reaction, which was, hey, if it's all been done, just tell us it's been done. And I think that's exactly what the foundation did. They just said, okay, no more vote on this. This is a transparency report. But they also, did add, as you said, all these restrictions, which I think put them in a better spot. But that was, I think, again, I can't speak to what the foundation did, but leading up to creating this, that was the thought process, at least.
So I want to ask really quickly about what's next for Off-Chain Labs and for Arbitrum. I mean, I also want to mention that there's been a lot of noise in the L2 space. ZK EVMs have reached the market. There's more coming out this year with Scroll and Consensus. And people have said that ZK rollups are superior to optimistic rollups. So what does this mean for Arbitrum?
Yeah, so for Off-Chain Labs, I can't speak to the future roadmap of Arbitrum, which is actually the feature, right? That's a good thing because the DAO controls the roadmap of Arbitrum. And I can write all the code I want, and Off-Chain can write all the code they want. Off-Chain no longer has the ability, as there's no centralized entity, have the ability to actually launch code on the Arbitrum chains. It's the DAO, it's the community that controls that. But when it comes to the technology, this ZK is better than optimistic has been something I've heard for a long time. And I'm actually very excited now that there are ZK EVMs live, because you can look and see, oh, actually, these are much more expensive than optimistic rollups. Actually, they're far less compatible than optimistic rollups. And all the things, there was this tendency previously, it's very hard to fight against this mythical creature that doesn't exist. There was this tendency to say, I understand optimistic rollups today, but ZK rollups at some point will do all this. And now there's actually, well, we can compare. ZK rollups exist, and they're not that mythical creature. And the same way that ZK rollups will probably get better over time, the technology, at least the technology around the optimistic rollups will probably improve over time as well. And if the DAO wants to incorporate those upgrades, it will. So what I can tell you at Off-Chain Labs, our goal has always been to build the best scaling technology available, using the best tools available. We never came into this arena saying, here's a tool I have to use, right? The analogy I sometimes give is if a plumber comes to your house, and comes to your door and says, here's a hammer, I'm using this to fix the leak. And you say, no, wait, do you want to take a look at it first? See what it is, right? So while others have come and said, we are going to use ZK, and they've come and said that from the beginning of time, we've come and said, we're not optimistic in our name, we're not ZK, we're not Snark or Stark in our name, we're Off-Chain Labs. We are going to help build the revolutionary technology to scale today, to help scale today, because people have that problem today. And if you look what happened when Arbitrum Nitro launched, many of the initial innovations that were in the paper that I wrote at Princeton of Arbitrum were retired in favor of better technology that has been developed. And I think it's up to the DAO and the foundation to continue and decide what that roadmap looks like. But I'm not convinced that ZK will be better over time. And if it is, the DAO may decide to use it over time. I don't know. I don't speak for the DAO, and I can't. But the point is, I don't think the technological debate is settled. And I think now that there actually are ZK rollups that are live, you see many of those limitations that we've warned about come into play, but it's harder to fight against them when they don't actually exist. So it's actually, to me, a welcoming thing. And by the way, they've done excellent work. So I'm not trying to disparage any of the work they've done, but they're clearly at a point of significantly less maturity than optimistic rollups.
And in our last minute, I just want to end on the note, what's been the most challenging aspect on the road to decentralization?
Oh, that's a great question. The most challenging aspect on the road to decentralization, I think building the technology and the community, but probably harder than the community, right? So we know how to build technology. That's our expertise. It took us years, obviously, to build much of the technology we built today. But then there's the question of building community and people that actually care about it. And again, one of the most amazing things, even around some of the governance discussions, was there's a real community. When we say it's controlled by the community is not me, it's not Off-Chain Labs. There's a massive community with many different interests and companies and protocols and projects that care deeply about this. And that's critical for decentralization, because all the technology can be there, but if there's no one that actually wants to partake and offer their opinion and vote and argue and debate, that's bad. So, we want all this discussion, and I'm glad that it's there, and that was definitely not not taken for granted. Well,
thank you so much for your time.
Excellent, thank you.